Bureau of Investigative Journalism is the UK's largest independent investigative newsroom. It's also a big mouthful, so we call ourselves TBIJ as well. So we are a group of journalists, just over 40 people altogether, who work from our office in London with colleagues and collaborators all around the world to basically carry out public interest journalism that holds the powerful to account. We have 5 main areas of interest. So we have a health desk, a finance desk, an environment desk, a big tech desk, and then a UK-based section called Bureau Local, and they look at national and local issues in the UK around injustice and justice.
Great. So, I mean, you couldn't be a better source to talk about source, because investigation cannot happen in journalism without the right sources. Because what you do is a lot of very sensitive and a lot of in-depth content. So I doubt very much your sources are whoever's comment on Twitter or Instagram. So who are your primary sources? What do you use as your sources as the base, as the starting point?
So, I mean, sources can come from everywhere, and they can often come from social media. So I think, like any journalist or any kind of researcher, really, we look at all available data. We're always listening to people. We're picking up on conversation. We're reading bits and pieces. We're being curious about stuff that we see on the TV or we hear on the radio or that our family and friends are telling us. So quite often sources will be, basically white data. So things that you'll find on the internet or that's already out there. So we may, for example, get a little tease about something that we think is of interest, and we'd just be like, how did that thing happen? That sounds a bit strange. In which case we do what any other journalist would do, check out some clippings, do a Google search, look on social media for either keywords or people who are involved. And in that way, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all of those platforms are potential sources of sources for us. When we're looking into specific corporations or bodies or organizations, then obviously, like anyone else, we can go through the press office and through contacts there, but we might also be asking questions that people potentially don't want to talk about. So in that case, we might think about trying to find previous employees or people within insider knowledge that might feel comfortable to speak to us. In that case, we might use platforms like LinkedIn or, again, Google, and then work from there. You can jigsaw together people. If you find somebody on a social site who's friends with somebody else, again, you can kind of follow the trail that way. Sometimes people come to us as whistleblowers, and that can be great, but it isn't without risk for them because the laws in the UK around whistleblowing could be stronger. Other times we might get more informal tips from people. So perhaps they work somewhere, or they've had a personal experience with something, or they have some other kind of information that they share with us. Now that can come to us as an email, a phone call. People write to us through the post. There's lots of different ways of getting in touch. And then for a lot of our journalists, it's like any other form of journalism, it's about human relationships. So during COVID, like many people, we all found ourselves working remotely. The team I started at the Bureau was in fact a global health team, and we didn't meet in person for 18 months because of lockdown. So in that case, the real kind of journalism, gumshoe work was done remotely. So people were making contacts, talking to previous contacts, meeting new people through phone calls, Zooms, all kinds of digital ways that, are different from taking somebody for a coffee or for a glass of wine. So that presented its own challenges. But in another way, it was a really good experience because the Bureau's always worked very collaboratively across borders with all kinds of investigative journalists, regular journalists, freelancers around the world. And for us during lockdown, our kind of collaborative approach really came to the fore because we couldn't send somebody to Ghana to investigate whether the vaccines had arrived on the tarmac, but we could work with freelancers or other reporters in that country and in countries around the world, in fact, to help us report. And then we could publish stories together on the same day with like shared credits and bylines, which is how we operate anyway. So I think, as with lots of jobs, investigative journalism is about talking to people, more actually listening to people, but keeping up those relationships, building up trust, building up rapport, and really kind of trying to get to, I think, as lots of people say, the best version of the truth.
For instance, using or engaging journalists abroad, outside the UK, and now potentially, whistleblowers as well, who may come from anywhere. in the same way you mentioned that the law for whistleblowers in the UK is not one of the most robust we can find. In some of the places, people, journalists and whistleblowers are exposed to potentially even more risks. How do you balance that? How do you work through that, given the direct risks to some individuals who may be your source or may be the report on the ground, firming things up or checking things for you?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think depressingly every week we hear about colleagues who have been injured, taken hostage, or sadly even killed around the world doing this work. So it's of absolute importance to us that people's safety, is number one. So we work with partners around the world who are based in those countries. We will use people with local knowledge and local experience to make sure that we're going in with our eyes wide open. We work with places like the Dart Centre who have great experience in safeguarding and protecting people. And I think, as with all these things, you have to make an assessment of the risk benefits. I think, like many reporters, people at the Bureau would go to great lengths to get the story and to get the truth. And I think it's the job of editors especially to say, right, we know you want to do this and you want to go there, but we need to do it safely, and we need to do it in a way that doesn't put you at harm and doesn't put the sources at harm. So basic things like offering people anonymity if required for telling a story, that's something we would do. But again, that can't come at the expense of being able to prove the story is true or second source it. So everything we do is fact checked. So again, we do need to be able to know that even confidential sources, who they are, but that's again protected and looked after in a very careful way. And I think we take every investigation and every kind of part of an investigation on a case by case basis. So again, being able to collaborate and talk to people is the best way through this. So we would take advice from professionals, people that know the area. We would work with local people on the ground who have experience and really, not risk anything. We would take really good care not to overstretch ourselves for the sake of a story. So it's a real balancing act between wanting to get to the truth and also being very aware that people shouldn't come to harm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's interesting because some people outside, they think that sometimes editors stop journalists from doing things due to kind of a interest or conflict or whatever. And most of the time, when that happens, or quite often that happens, is because you want to protect them, their safety, because many of them are very gung ho. They do want to go or expose themselves, and you're the one who have to say, "Oops, no, please don't," because I think you're very important that no story is worth someone's life.
Yeah, and actually, if I could add, sorry, I should also say that it's obviously a responsibility of reporters and editors to make sure that the people talking to them, who probably aren't journalists and don't necessarily understand the intricacies of media, are fully protected and aware that they're talking on the record or off the record and what it means to be named. And if we collaborate with partners around the world as we do, then that story can go anywhere and everywhere. So I think again, it's on the people engaging with our sources to do no harm at the very least, but also really give people the information they need to make an informed decision about how and who they engage with.
Do you think, I mean, this is not about the Bureau, but I'm talking to you as a journalist, as an editor, an experienced one. Do you think that the newsrooms in general think hard enough about the consequences to sources once the story is out? Do they alert in the way that you clearly have as a practice at the Bureau to make them aware of the fact that once they speak, you know, there will be consequences once their names are out there? Do you think we do that enough?
I would find it really hard to say because I don't have experience of a great number of other newsrooms. I think that what I would say is that there is, a great deal of journalism being done in the world, and most of it is really, really good. And I think when things go wrong, um, that obviously has a danger of kind of tarring everyone with the same brush. So I think being responsible and being thoughtful and taking that extra time is really important. And I think we don't do daily news, so we have a bit more of the space to do that. And I think obviously when the pressures are to hit deadlines and to be first and get the story out, that it puts a really different complexion on things. But hopefully anyone in a position of any kind of responsibility, well, anyone working in a newsroom should feel comfortable and able to speak up. And I think that is that's key. you can't be a kind of lone wolf out for the story, regardless of the impact of people around you. You know, for lots of people, the stories are really important for reporters, but we're basically getting insights into people's lives, and it's their generosity and their bravery that's allowing us to do that. They have to live with their lives after the journalists have gone away. So again, we really, really owe it to them to think responsibly and carefully. So I don't know. I'd like to say I think most journalists are really responsible and thoughtful about that, but I'm sure it's not perfect every time.
Now, I know there is a danger that it's thought that every investigative piece is done through the leaking of documents and whistleblowers and so on. As you said, a lot is the hard slog of having information, checking, finding different strands, putting all that together and so on. But let's go for that in a way, the more like a James Bond, like the sort of what feels more like exciting for many people. But a big challenge always is whistleblowers. Many of them will do things for altruistic reasons, and sometimes people leak things for manipulation. We see that, especially in the political world. Most of the things that are leaked via ministries and so on, they have a reason to go out, and often it's not for the best for society, but actually it's about damaging somebody else. How? And I imagine you face that quite often as well, as these things come your way. In a way, how to handle that, because you may still have public interest, but that this is being done. You may be aware of the fact that this may be done for other motives, not public interest.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. A question that's drummed into you from the beginning is like, why is this person telling you the thing they're telling you? So, the primary thing is like, are they telling you the truth? Can you verify from other sources that what they're telling you is correct, accurate? So can they provide you with paperwork? Can you speak to somebody who's separate from them who can confirm the same thing? Can you find other evidence? But of course, like whether they're telling you the truth or not is one thing. As you alluded to, the another key thing is why are they talking to you in the first place? So I think everyone who works in journalism is hopefully healthily skeptical, but sometimes unhealthily so. But understanding people's motives is really key, and I think reporters will have their own ways of doing this. But I think there is there's something really again, it's on a human level. Can you try and connect with somebody to understand their motivations? And sometimes you might ask a question as broadly as something like, my editor or some of our readers will think, well, you're just telling me that because the company sacked you. Of course, you're going to say all this stuff. So how do you back it up? So again, I think putting it to the person and seeing how they respond and seeing whether that, smells fishy to you or not. But basically, you can't take anything on face value, even if it's what you're desperate to be, especially if it's what you're desperate. If you have a suspicion and somebody tells you almost what you want to hear, you've got to be extra careful and be like, well, that fits with my hypothesis, but is it true? And I think you need to get an editor or a colleague to really do the whole, right, I'm going to imagine, I'm basically trying to disprove what you've just told me. And you've really got to push it and pull it. And I think that's where investigative journalism and newsrooms especially come into their own, because you have such a wealth of experience. And I don't just mean like people who've done years of journalism, because that's really important, but you have people who are newer to the career, people that aren't reporters, but they do other really important jobs in the newsroom. And between you, there's a whole wealth of perspectives where somebody might say, oh, yeah, but they could just be doing it for that reason. And, it might be something you never thought of. And again, somebody just asking a simple question, how did they seem? Or how did you get this contact in the first place? So again, I think that's another reason why we need diverse and inclusive newsrooms. So you get a different perspective. So people with knowledge of a particular country or an awareness of a historical thing that may have influenced this, but also somebody who's completely green to an area who can just come in like a reader and just say, well, that doesn't seem that surprising to me. So, in summary, it's really hard. I mean, you have to trust people in that, that you're engaging with them and they're going to do the best, but that doesn't mean that you believe everything they tell you. And a good source won't be offended or upset if you challenge them. And, you wouldn't be doing your job and you wouldn't be doing them a service if you don't, verify and make it all checkable, because, you don't want somebody to risk telling you something, putting their, maybe their reputation on the line, or certainly, even whistleblowing, and then not the story not get through either legal hurdles or to get challenged after publication because you haven't done your job properly. So again, I think it's great when you get that smoking gun or that eureka moment, but it does everyone a disservice if we don't do our jobs by like double, triple checking and checking again.
Now, you mentioned fact checking. Many newsrooms, if it probably is fair to say, most newsrooms around the world don't have fact checkers. Actually, this is more of an American culture, at least the big newsrooms, of having. For those who work with them, they almost feel like a bit like your internal auditors. They question almost every word the reporter writes down, every quote, everything. But actually, it has given them a much more robust journalism because errors are considerably reduced. Is that something you very much implemented at the bureau as well? And is that something that you would recommend everyone should do?
So obviously, I love all my colleagues equally, but the fact checkers especially they're just the best. So I've been lucky enough to work in two publications with dedicated fact check resource. At the bureau, we're very lucky to have somebody who oversees all the fact checks. But in fact, everyone is trained to do a fact check at the bureau. So the reporters and the impact producers and the editors, and that's really great because I think there's something about being a reporter and having to kind of footnote every single fact in a story that really makes you be really specific and careful about what you say. But on the other side, when you've gone through and you're verifying somebody else's story, it really helps you appreciate from the other side, oh, yeah, no, I realized I phrased that sloppily, or maybe that isn't as clear as it could be, or I accidentally assumed that last year meant 2022 and it actually was 2021. So I think on a kind of on a career development level, actually, it's a bit like being editing makes you a better writer, fact checking makes you a better reporter. But also, I think, legally speaking, and like, in terms of respecting your sources and respecting the truth, fact checking isn't a luxury. It's something that should be a part of all newsrooms, honestly. I think if you're copy editing, you should be fact checking. And I think there are ways of doing that. Not everyone can have dedicated resource, but there are certainly within the UK some fantastic freelance fact checkers we've worked with. And in the US, like you said, where it really started, but the Bureau is up there, I would say, with publications around the world, but certainly in the UK, we are very thorough. And it's partly around, legal risk. We want to be accurate. We want to be right. We spend months and months on these investigations. But there's also that kind of building up trust. You don't want to read something and have a stupid error. Something that's just, it could be inconsequential to the story, but that's, telling the reader, oh yeah, no, I'm not sure about this place. And we really prize accuracy, higher almost than anything else. So I think it shouldn't be a luxury. If you're spending money on journalism, you need to spend money on editors and you need to spend money on fact checking. Just like you wouldn't scrimp on lawyers or legal advice, so you shouldn't on fact checking. For me, it goes hand in hand around building trust and accuracy around journalism. So yeah, I love fact checkers. More funding for fact checking, please.
Okay, Chrissie, we talked about the source being people who come and with this element of the public interest. They're bringing thoughts. The journalist looking for the information, and as you said, sometimes the strand is something. It's not the what they've seen, is what is behind it as well. Now, the other side, and something that actually matters a lot to me as a journalist is. In journalism, we tend to be very good at talking about what we see, but not very good at talking about what we don't see. In other words, what we don't know, what we don't know. Donald Rumsfeld was there are lots of jokes about his known unknowns and unknown unknowns, but I always thought actually it was a clumsy way of saying something that made a lot of sense. There are things you don't know, but you need to know, or you have to try. And there are things you don't even know, you don't know. Again, when you're approaching, because of the level of depth of the kind of a work you're doing, how do you work that? Is about actually, there are gaps here, or if we don't explain what we just don't know, or almost like what we're not going to cover, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means we don't know.
So yeah, understanding what we know and what we don't know is obviously a huge part of being a good reporter and being a good editor as well, asking those right questions. And I think something about investigations that is appealing to the people that do them is that you have the time and space to really get into something. Even then, I think it's a bit like when people start PhDs, all you end up knowing is how much you don't know about something. Like at the start, you're like, I think I kind of get it. But there's lots of ways of dealing with that. And I think a huge way that we work at the Bureau is talking to obviously experts in the field. So, for example, in global health, we'll talk to people from universities and hospitals, from global bodies like WHO, World Health Organization. We talk with NGOs, so non-governmental organizations, civil society groups, charities, patient groups, all sorts of anyone and everyone that we think might know about a subject. And those first interviews, before we even know what we might look at, those scoping chats, they're generally off the record, they're very broad. And it's the kind of thing that anyone would ask somebody if you're sat next to them on a bus. Like, what do you do? What's difficult for you? What would surprise people about your job? What could you change now if you could change one thing? So those kind of general chats are really helpful. And I think that helps us at the start map out the problem. And I think with investigative journalism, the big thing for me to learn, which sounds quite obvious now, but you can't investigate something that hasn't happened yet. So for us to look at an investigation at the Bureau, it has to be systemic. So we're talking about something that isn't a single case or even in a single country necessarily. It's something that there is a wider problem that, is affecting a number of people. It has to be something where for us, really, there could be some positive change or impact in the world. So we take a kind of impact informed approach, which doesn't mean we're setting out with a specific aim for our story. So we're not activists. We're not out there looking to change the world, but if we can reveal information or shine light on something that's happened, we want to put those findings in the hands of groups and individuals and affected communities so that they can use that information. So during COVID, we did an investigation into the price of medical oxygen in cylinders in various African countries. And the data gap for us was that nobody actually knew what different people were paying in different countries in Africa and even in different hospitals. So we found out the price of those cylinders. We basically published a list alongside the more narrative story. And that really helped people realize there was something going on with the companies in that there wasn't a kind of fair way of pricing. And again, it seems very simple. How much do these things cost? Oh, we don't know. Let's ask some people. So partly for the Bureau, it's about identifying a data gap. So if we can identify a data gap that we can fill, again, that's something we don't know. That's something that isn't known. So we're like, where are the gaps? Where are the holes? And then I think when it comes to deciding what we follow and what we don't follow, we always say, what's the biggest problem in this area that investigative journalism can be a tool to help. So we've also tried in the last few years something called systems mapping, which is in a very simple explanation is kind of when you have an area of interest, you can work out all of the things that are involved. So if you're looking at house prices, you've got things like, how much is rent? How many houses are available? Is there migration in or out of that place? Who wants to live there? You kind of map out the problem and you see what's interdependent and you see that this affects that and that affects this. And if that goes up, that goes down. By looking at it on that holistic way, you can almost work out which little bit could we potentially look at? Where could journalism help provide information or shine a light? Where is it actually like political will that's missing? Where is it, money? Again, so there's systems like that. But again, with all things scoping wise, it's about trying to understanding what you don't know, and then understanding which parts can be investigated, boundarying that investigation so you can actually achieve it within a few months or maybe several months, and then really kind of putting the information back out there, hopefully for others to use and build on. So yeah, we don't know lots of stuff. We love not knowing stuff, and we love people that know stuff.
Great. You mentioned data sets, and so on becoming very, very important and being important in their thinking, which is brilliant. So we're moving to new technology, and especially a lot being said and talked about AI and the risks they bring with fake things, or you don't know who's behind it and all that kind of stuff. We're all aware of that. How are you looking? Is the Bureau looking into how to use technology, AI included, AI-based technology, to help with the work it's doing, the investigations being supported by machines that, in theory, should help the work the journalists have to do.
Yeah, so I think like all organizations, the Bureau is very interested in technologies that are coming out. We're interested in them from a professional point of view. So how might we use them? How could they kind of improve what we do, make us more efficient, help us build an audience, help us diversify the way we tell stories? So all of that stuff that I think probably most platforms are thinking about. We're also coming at it from, the other angle around like how could this be misused by bad actors? How would you investigate that? How would you know that? So AI for us, like any kind of other emerging technology or honestly platform or app, is both a source of kind of professional interest for investigations, but also for use. So I don't think we've used. I mean, maybe that's what my reporters are doing right now, and I'm like, this copy's great, and it's actually come through Chat GPT. I don't know that we're doing that, but I certainly know that we're thinking about how to, for example, write social media posts in like an effective way to kind of get to a point where you can A/B test headlines and things like that. So we are really alive to the idea of using tech to basically engage better, build a greater direct audience, to kind of get better engagement around our stories, and also not be wedded to the old ways of telling stories, and to kind of really be led by the audience and the story itself to tell us how best to share that information.
And are you looking into technology that could help you check whether things might be fake or not? Almost like the digital equivalent of someone checking a counterfeit banknote, because one of the concerns is that, isn't it? You don't know if that picture or that voice, that clip, we're getting to the point of the deep fake that you really will struggle to know the difference between what is completely made up and what is real. Is the Bureau looking into are there tools, or you're beginning to see tools of trying to be able to check the authenticity of a piece of information or a clip or a file? Are you?
Yeah, I think that verification is a huge challenge for everyone, and I think even on traditional documents and websites, we're always fact checking and being very careful that what we can test, and to see whether it's correct or not. I'm not aware of any particular tools we've had so far to be able to check those things out. Quite often when we have projects that involve things like that, we'll be working with a partner who potentially has specific expertise in that area, or we would engage with somebody whose kind of job it is to help us with those. So I know when that comes up, we will be really interested in finding that out. But we are investigating different ways in which these kinds of technologies and these kind of platforms can be used by bad actors to spread mis or disinformation. So again, I think investigating it means understanding it, and hopefully understanding it means understanding if it could be useful to journalism, as well as something that we want to use our journalism to uncover.
Uh, Chrissie, you mentioned earlier in the interview legal aspects as well, and we are both in probably the world's capital of libel laws, and some of the most draconian and some of the toughest for journalists. I mean, I just oversimplify sometimes around the world, and I tell people that even the distributor of a newspaper, those ones who are just carrying the piece of paper from the printing press to the shop, are potentially liable, as well as the media just gives a sense of how tough it is, and the whole burden of proof and so on. Certain things have gone worse, actually, if anything, and we know that quite often foreign dignitaries, foreign personalities come to the UK to sue here and cause havoc, and sometimes financial havoc with the organizations or individuals, because they know that this is where they can come and do it. You are here and you deal with a lot of very sensitive matters as well. So I'm sure you're extremely aware of that, and the concern, and also concern for colleagues, for individuals now who are being sued as well, and for the right to, basically, for the media to work, and the journalists to be working freely without that kind of responsibility, but freely. And with the partners abroad as well, what you have is potentially they are liable as well. So a long-winded question, but a kind of my main point is, how do you handle, especially being the UK, how do you handle the question of media laws, libel laws in the UK, and the impact they can have in organizations like yours or any other media company?
As you said, the UK is really kind of the capital for libel laws in the world, and I think it's a very live and real risk to all of us. And having strict libel laws mean that we have to be able to prove that what we've published is true and in the public interest, and that's correct, and it should be. But something that we're seeing increasingly in the UK, especially, is this idea of lawsuits called SLAPs, and that stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. Now, these are specific lawsuits that are brought in by honestly really well-resourced individuals, and they can be used against journalists or activists working in the public interest. So they can actually have a really damaging, chilling effect on the kind of right to be critical and to kind of do public interest journalism and activism. And one of the major issues with these is how much it costs to go to court. Now, even if the court finds in your favour, you could find yourself thousands or even millions of pounds out of pocket. And obviously defending these things is incredibly stressful, it's incredibly expensive, like we said, and it takes up a lot of time. And I think over time, there's a general chilling on the work of journalism and the work of journalists, especially investigative journalism, because honestly, you're thinking, is this going to get us in trouble? Is this going to take up money? Is this going to take up time? Is it going to have, it's really stressful and difficult for journalists. And for some reason, the UK seems to be a specifically favourable place for these slaps to take place. And I think it's really an example of, kind of strict libel laws being weaponised to chill this expression. And this is vital in holding politicians to account. So not only for journalists, like I said, but for civil society groups and activists. So we get, maybe up to 80 legal letters a year at TBIJ, and that they're not all kind of letters saying that we're going to go to court, but they come from lawyers, they're scary, they require a lot of thinking and replying and responding to, and it's not that we shouldn't be able to be held to account by people. It's the idea that, perhaps some of these laws are being misused by people with, big, deep pockets. And that actually that could be really having a negative impact on, the right to everyone to know what's happening in their country and around the world.
And what's being done to try and stop that? Is there a campaign? Is there some work being done to change the law so that it's not quite as easy for them? As you said, actually, it's weaponizing something that actually is there for a good reason, but is being cleverly turned into something a lot more chilling that probably when the law was created, that wasn't the objective.
Yeah, it's a really big issue. And we at TBIJ are working with other people in the field and with politicians to really try and bring light to this issue and get some change going. And I think if anybody is interested, please Google it, find the articles on our site and get in touch. Because it feels, like one of the biggest threats to journalism. It's very hard to fund investigative journalism. It's very hard to be in a newsroom where you have the time and space to do this work properly. And these legal threats are existential. They are really one of the biggest challenges to doing journalism in the UK and effectively in the rest of the world today.